tutorial for my new bento box quilt pattern, knitted quilt of course. We can go ahead and cut away to a picture of the whole quilt. If you haven't yet watched the intro video, that's a separate video, and if you click the little eye in the upper right-hand corner, I'll give you a link to that video. It's important. We talk about the construction and the yarn and lots of other stuff, and it's a separate video so we can dive right in with the knitting in this video. If you'd like to get your free pattern to follow along, just click the little eye in the upper right-hand corner. That will take you to my website where you can download the free pattern and the free coloring page. You will also find a link to the KPC website and their Gossip Chunky Organic Cotton Yarn. That's the yarn that I used in this blanket. They have over 40 different colors available, and you'll have a lot of fun putting those together and coloring your page, hopefully. I did. And I want to mention, I mentioned in the intro, but when you first look at the website for the yarn's going to look ridiculously expensive unless you live in Hong Kong. It's because the default currency on the website is Hong Kong dollars. You can click the top of the page and change the currency to your home country, and you can see how much the yarn actually is. It's a great value on organic cotton, and KPC has quick shipping. Also on my website and in the pattern, you'll see the yarn amounts and the needles and everything else you need, but mostly I encourage you to watch the intro video so that you have all the information about how this whole thing goes together. And next up, we are going to get started with row 1 of the first mitered square, and that's coming up. We are ready to get started with the knitting, and if you watch the intro video, you know that these are the quilt blocks that we're working on. This, it's about 13 by 13. We make 16 of these in 2 different color combinations, and that's what we're going to get started with here. And I want to say, as far as a gauge swatch goes, you can just start working row 1 and finish the entire first section up to the color change and measure, and your little square should be 4.5 by 4.5 inches, and if that's what you're getting, then your gauge is on. If your square is larger than 4.5 by 4.5, you want to go down a needle size. If it's smaller, you want to go up a needle size. Although exact gauge isn't that important, but if you want the yarn amounts to be the same, and if you want your blanket to end up being a good throw size, 60 by 60, then you want to get as close to gauge as possible. But let's go ahead and get started with row 1. Okay, I'm going to start with pink yarn here and cast on 2 stitches. I'm using the long tail cast on. I can give you a link to my video on that. You can use a knitted cast on. You can use any cast on you like, really. First thing, row 1, I'm going to knit those 2 stitches. Row 2, I'm going to KFB, and that's a knit front back increase. First thing I do is knit the stitch normally, but I don't pull the old stitch off the left needle. Instead, I swing the tip of my needle around and put it into the back loop of that stitch, wrap it, pull it through, pull the old stitch off the needle. So I've made 2 stitches out of what was once 1. And at this point, I want to put a marker, a little ring marker on the right needle and knit the last stitch. Okay. Now this row, I'm going to KFB the first stitch. So I knit it normally. Swing the needle around to the back loop of that stitch, wrap it and pull it through, and the old stitch off. Slip the stitch marker from the left needle to the right, and knit the last 2 stitches. I'm not sure what row we're on anymore, but I am following the pattern. I'll knit the first stitch, KFB the second stitch, slip the marker, knit to end. We're going to start to see a pattern here in just a minute. Knit the first stitch, KFB the second stitch, slip the marker, knit to end. Okay, this is where we're going to start to see the pattern coming out, because every row in this blanket for all the mitered squares is essentially the same. You're going to knit up to 1 stitch before the marker, KFB, slip the marker, knit to end. Every row is the same, every single row. So I knit up to 1 stitch before the marker, KFB that stitch, slip the marker, knit to end. Knit up to 1 stitch before the marker, KFB, slip the marker, knit to end. Okay, now we're going to break down a few more things. KFB to 1 stitch before the marker. Now, let's talk about the KFB. Because this is cotton yarn, it doesn't have a lot of give to it, and there's a kind of a decent chance that you'll end up with some tension issues on your KFB. So this is how we're going to avoid that. Put your needle in, wrap the stitch and pull it through, swing the tip of your needle around and put it in the back loop, and right here, tug. Tug your yarn, and you'll see the first half of that stitch tightens up kind of a lot. Yeah, you'll find there's a lot of slack on that stitch. And then complete the KFB. Don't worry, I'll show you that again. And that tug will become automatic. I kind of do it on all of my KFBs, not just cotton, but it ends up being kind of more important with cotton yarn. Put the needle in the back, tug. It just gives you a nicer increase line. Okay, knit up to 1 stitch before the marker. KFB, slip marker, knit to end. Okay, I'm going to finish this row because there's something else I want to show you. Something that's nice about this project is you work all these mitered squares separately. So even though you're working on this whole blanket, you don't have a blanket-sized project to carry around with you. You just have this little mitered square. So it's a blanket, but it's actually a portable project. So you look at what we have here so far with our knitting. And I know if I don't explain this, people are going to ask me, mine doesn't look like a square. What's up with this? And it doesn't. It looks like a, I don't know, that's not even, there's no name for that shape. But watch this. If I let the needles shape the piece the way that the knitting really wants to go, you'll see it's a perfect square. So you are knitting a square, even if it looks like a little bunched up teardrop or something on the needles. Okay, I'm going to work one more row before we move on to the next thing. And this is all really clear in the pattern about when the color changes happen. I'm going to do a little abbreviated version here though. You'll keep working that same increase row until you have 28 stitches total, and that's how big your swatch is. It's excuse me, 14 stitches on each side of the marker, 28 stitches total. And then you'll change color. And I want to show you how we're going to do the color change. This is how I did the color change because people have different ways of doing this. This this is my way of doing it so that it's not going to come unraveled in the machine washing drying process. So I'm ready to change color. I've broken the yarn, I put my needle in, I grab the new color and kind of flop it over like this, leaving myself about a 6-inch tail. Take that loop and put it on the back needle and pull it through, and then just knit a few stitches, 3 or 4, and then turn your work over to the back of the work. You have the 2 ends here. Go ahead and tie those 2 ends in a double knot. And the reason we do it now instead of when we finish this row is because this new stitch is still on the needle and not on the cord. We want that needle to keep that stitch that size so it isn't bunched up on the edges. And once you have the new color started, you just keep working. You try to keep working, there we go, the same row that you've been working this whole time. And you'll see the mitered squares grow pretty quickly. I've already got that much going. Now let me see. Next, I want to talk about the ends. And this is a smaller mitered square than is actually in the blanket. In the blanket we have 3 colors, and this is just 2, and I made it this way so that it'd be smaller and fit on camera. But let's talk about these ends. Okay, I am really wrenching on this knot. It is cotton, you can't break the yarn. Well, maybe somebody out there can break the yarn. I can't break the yarn. And this is how I'm going to handle the ends. This is how I always handle ends with cotton yarn. First, I'm going to get the end away from the edge of the work, and I'm going to do it just like normal weaving in of a garter stitch. But really all you have to do is get it away from the edge of the work. The reason we don't want to mess with the edge of the work is because we're going to be seaming, and we want the seam to not be interrupted with knots. And then I'm going to separate the plies about half and half. And I threaded half of those plies onto my tapestry needle. I'm just going to go under the closest loop. So my 2 ends are coming out of 2 different places. And now I tie a knot softly. I tie a knot a little harder, and I tie a 3rd knot and I wrench on it. And once you do that, you can cut it very short. And that's not going anywhere. We'll do this one more time. I'm going to get this end away from the edge. You know, when you're weaving in cotton end or wool ends, the whole point is just to weave it in, and then eventually the wool kind of sticks to itself, and then that's how it secures the end. But cotton doesn't stick to itself, so we have to take these extra steps. Separate the plies half and half. Thread half the plies on a tapestry needle and just go under the nearest loop. And then tie a knot gently. Tie a knot with a little more force. Tie a knot with all your might. Okay, and cut it short. I actually left a little length on this one. It's not necessary. Okay, let me check my list here really quickly. Nope, I've gone over everything I need to cover in this one. Next up, we're going to talk about seaming and the borders and a few other things in the next segment. Once you get all of your mitered squares finished, we need to seam things up and add the border. And if you were smart, you were weaving the ends as you go so that you don't have a million of them to weave in when you get to the end of the blanket like I did, but not a problem. I don't mind weaving in ends. So first I want to talk about how the seams all come together, and then we're actually going to go through seaming and adding the border. So let's go and take a look. Okay, we're back to these little cutouts because this is how I recommend seaming. Okay, I recommend seaming in strips like this. Let me see if I can do this. Seaming all the strips. Oh wow, this is more confusing than I thought it was going to be. No, it's not. Okay. I can put it all together, but leaving that space was making me confused. I recommend seaming it in strips like this to create these strips, and then seaming the strips together. And what I did, these are only 2 of the strips, you will have 4. What I did is I seamed the strips, and then I actually added the border to the top and bottom before seaming them all together, just so that I had, it was already really hot in Texas when I knit this blanket. It cooled off a little since, but I didn't want to have all the blanket on my lap all the time. So I seamed all the strips, added the border here, added the border here, and then, you know, seamed all of these together and added the last 2 borders. I'll explain that again in the pattern if that's confusing at all. And so first we're going to talk about seaming the side-by-side seams when you're seaming them into the strips. And again, this is these are not whole quilt blocks. These are little abbreviated versions of the quilt blocks, so they fit well on screen. And what we're going to do is just the mattress stitch for garter stitch. And I actually like to start down here. It is easier to start down here, not at the beginning of the mitered corner, but at the other end. And the whole thing just comes together really easily. I think you'll find the seaming goes pretty quickly. So the first thing I'm going to do is attach the yarn at one corner by going through the same hole twice and then coming up through the edge over here. Okay, and now what we're going to do is the mattress stitch, but because it's garter stitch, we're not really looking for ladders. You have the very edge stitch, and then we're going to look at purl bumps 1 more column in. And you're always going to grab something that is a purl bump from the top and something that's kind of hidden and underneath. That's what we're grabbing. So we have a purl bump from the top and something that's kind of hidden and underneath. You'll see there's a V and there's a bar kind of in that V. That's what we're grabbing. Really, if you're grabbing like if you're going under the same amount of, the same length of fabric on each side each time, it will be successful. So now I can't see what I just did. I go back into the hole that I came out of and kind of grab the 2 ladders, the one purl bump on top and the one underneath, jump over the other side, go into the hole I came out of. I've got a purl bump on top and a purl bump underneath. And you just keep going into the same hole you came out of, grabbing the same thing, back and forth. And it ends up going quickly because we're working with, you know, big chunky stitches here. And you always know you're on track because the big chunky stitches show your garter stitch ridges lining up beautifully. Okay, you see how beautiful that is? So you seam all of your pieces, all of your mitered squares up into strips, and then the next thing I want to show you is, the next thing you'll be seaming is cast on rows to bind off rows, right? Let me figure out how to set this up so it's not as visually confusing. Okay. Once you seam the strips, when you start seaming the strips together, you're going to be seaming bind off rows to bind off rows, not cast on rows to bind off to bind off. And so I want to show you how to do that as well. I'm going to attach the yarn to the corner here by going through twice and attach it to the other piece by going through once, the very edge. Now what we're looking for here is a bit different. We're looking for V's just under the bind off row. So we have these V's going this way, and the first one you'll see a V. Go under both legs of that V, jump over the other side. The first V of the bind off row, there's a hidden little V under there. Go under both legs of that. And we're doing the exact same thing we were doing before. Mattress stitch is kind of always the same. It's just based on what you're picking up from each side. Go into the hole you came out of. Go under both legs of the V. Go into the same hole you came out of. Go under both legs of the V. Whoops. I'm having a hard time seeing where I came out last time. There we are. Sometimes if you loosen it up, you can more easily see where you came out last time. And again, this seaming goes really quickly because we have big, happy, puffy stitches. You can tighten it up and loosen it up as well to get it so that it matches. If it's too scrunchy, you can just pull on it to loosen it up like I just did. So you'll seam it in strips, and then you'll seam the bind off to the bind off when you're seaming the strips together. And then the last thing you'll do is adding the border. Well, depending on, if you did it just like I did, then you'll do some seaming and adding. Oh, where's my piece to add the border? Here we go. This is the piece that I knit up to test out machine washing and drying. You'll see no color bleeding, came out beautifully. The yarn is great. So to add the border, we're going to pick up and knit across the bind off row. And if you've done this before, it's not a problem. It's just like anything else, picking up and knitting in any other bind off row, but I'm going to demonstrate it. I just put my needle in under both legs of the V, take my border yarn, and just like when I was changing colors, fold it over and wrap that loop on the back needle and pull it through. And I'm going to do this across the row. And you'll go under every single bind off stitch this way. See, pretty easy. If your bind off is tight, I recommend binding off with a larger needle, and that's all in the pattern. But if your bind off is tight, you'll have a little more difficulty getting your needle in there. I recommend using a fairly sharp needle to make it easier. So you'll pick up the stitches all the way across, pick up and knit, all the way across on one side, and then purl back, and then the same increases that we did, the KFB, we're going to do the same KFB in the border so that the line of the mitered square goes right up into the border with no disruption. And I'll show you what I mean. Because of course I have another piece knit up. Okay, this one's kind of messy here. So I have my border knit. Of course this is a small piece, it's not the whole blanket, just enough for me to show you on camera. I did these increases along these edges, and it follows the same line as the mitered squares, and all I need to do is seam this up. You may notice that it's hard to keep a really beautiful edge on the KFB edge of the border, but it's so not a problem because we're just going to seam it up. And you can use kind of any seam for this if you want to whip stitch it. It's such a short little thing. And I'm using the end that was left here from the bind off. I'm going to connect it to the other side, and I'm doing kind of a form of the Bickford seam. Let me see how I'm not sure how I want to hold this. I'm going to go under 2 purl bumps on one side, jump over, go over 2 purl bumps on this side. And unlike mattress stitch, I'm not going to go back into the same hole. I'm actually going to skip 2 edge stitches and go into 2 edge stitches. and then skip 2 edge stitches and go under 2 edge stitches. So it's kind of like, it makes that sound. And then when you tighten it up, you know, it looks good. It matches up with the rest of it. I didn't leave myself an especially long tail to do this seam, but I'm just stubborn enough to make it work. Okay. And then you'll do that just 4 times, these little short edges, and then weave in your end the way that we've been weaving them in this whole time. We did it. Those are all the techniques used in this blanket. Really, you know, I went through a lot of different stuff here, but you're going to spend 95% of the time working on mitered squares, on little mitered squares, you know, 16 of them. Many thanks to KPC for sponsoring this video and letting us use their Gossip Chunky Organic Cotton yarn. I really had a nice time working with this yarn, and it did wash up so beautifully, and I love my blanket now that it's finished. Be sure to click through to my website for everything you need to get started on this project for your own, and good luck.